Fantastic Four First Steps is the first time we are officially seeing the Fantastic Four come to the MCU, so this is quite a big deal, this film. We have obviously seen these characters done in live action before when they were over at 20th Century Fox, but we've never really gotten a good movie out of that. We had two not so great campy versions, and then we got the reboot in 2015 with Fantastic, which is honestly probably one of the worst comic book movies we've ever gotten. So even though the bar is technically kind of low comparing it to the other Fantastic Four films that have come before, the bar is certainly set high given how important it is to get these characters finally done right, and how important and integral they are to the Marvel Universe. And this without a doubt is easily the best Fantastic Four film we've ever gotten. I think this is also just genuinely a very good Marvel film, and coming off the back of Thunderbolts, it definitely feels like Marvel is starting to get back on track with how good their films can be. Easily the most important part in getting the Fantastic Four done right is getting that family dynamic down, and they absolutely do here. It was easily my favorite part. I think all the interactions between the main four characters are really sharp. All the characterizations of the main four are really excellent, the performances throughout, and even though this is the first time that we're actually being introduced to these guys, you instantly kind of get the emotional connection that you need to with them because of how great the chemistry is between the main four, and you instantly start to care about them, and just overall kind of want to see more from these characters as they go along in the MCU franchise. In terms of casting, I was pretty much on board with all the casting, except I was a little bit hesitant about Pedro Pascal as Reed Richards, but honestly coming out of it, I thought he did a very good job. I totally bought him as that very intellectual but kind of socially inept Reed Richards that we're used to, and I think to do a great job of exploring his character and how intellectual he is, and also kind of the stakes though that he goes to, exploring how smart he is to kind of explore different options of saving humanity, and how he sometimes kind of goes down that dark rabbit hole of maybe thinking and taking his work too seriously, all the dark things that he has to think about in order to save humanity in certain ways, and I think they explore that really well with Reed Richards. Jessica Kirby as Sue Storm is excellent. She's probably one of the best parts about the movie. She adds so much empathy and emotion to the whole film, and I think her chemistry with Pedro Pascal is really excellent. You totally buy them as a married couple, and I think also the journey that her character goes on through when she eventually becomes a mother in this film, giving birth to Franklin Richards, is really interesting. It's also something that we haven't really seen in the MCU before, so it kind of adds a lot of depth and nuance that we really haven't seen, and that was really nice to see coming into a film that does actually feel quite different than the rest of the Marvel films that we've seen before. Joseph Quinn is a very strong Johnny Storm, Human Torch. He perfectly feels like what Johnny Storm would be like set in the 60s. He's, still kind of the cocky, slightly arrogant, woman-loving, attention-grabbing type of Johnny Storm that we're used to, but he's still very fun, and I love that there's clearly an effort to make him feel very intellectual, and he's not just there to, burst into flames and be used as an action star. He does actually feel like a scientist, just like the other three members of the Fantastic Four, which I really liked. I think Bon Moss Bachrach was probably my favorite character, though, as his portrayal of Ben Grimm, the Thing. I think all the visual effects, the motion capture work that they did with that character, they all looked really sharp. Straight ripped out of the comics, it looks excellent. There's a lot of great action that of course comes with the Thing. He's a lot of fun to watch, but again, a lot of the fun and charisma and emotion I think really come through him here, and he was probably my favorite character walking away from this film. I think overall across the board, even outside of the main Fantastic Four, is really excellent. I think Julia Garner as Shia LaBeouf, the female Silver Surfer, is really excellent. She is probably one of the more interesting villains that we've actually gotten, even though she doesn't say that much. She does a great performance, and I think the visual effects are super sharp on her, and she has probably some of the best action scenes, and they also do a great job of kind of adding a lot of emotional depth and backstory to her, just enough where you can kind of understand her character a little bit more, and she honestly is a character that I would like to see more of. Ralph Ineson is probably the best casting choice that you could have gotten for Galactus. He already has such an iconic, booming voice, so it perfectly fits that character. I think he looks great in the costume, and the visual effects to, make him look so large and massive. They work perfectly. They blend greatly in with the rest of the sets and visuals, and he's genuinely a well-told Galactus, which is kind of hard to do in live action, and even though there's maybe some shaky things in terms of how they portray him in this film, for the most part it is pretty solid, and I think his main motif and motive of why he's threatening this parallel Earth here, it's pretty interesting, and it does a great job of kind of adding some layers and depth to why you also want to care about watching the Fantastic Four specifically take on this villain. The story itself is pretty solid. I don't think there's anything that kind of blew me away with the story, but there's enough of an emotional grip that I think is really strong and utilized well. The reason for bringing Galactus to this film as a threat, it perfectly makes sense, and balancing that with the dynamic with the rest of the Fantastic Four, It all works very well. You get a great way of utilizing this threat to kind of exploit different relationships within the Fantastic Four that I think is used very well here. I think my main complaint though is I think this film actually could have been longer. We could have had another 10 or 15 minutes maybe spent early on before the main conflict kicks in to spend more time with these characters so that we just, care about them a little bit more and get a little bit more invested in this specific Earth and the Fantastic Four. As we do kind of get sped run through it right away, I understand kind of wanting to skip past the origin because a lot of us know that, but we could have just spent more time with these characters, honestly, because I do really enjoy them, and I think that would have just added a lot more depth to the film, and the film definitely wraps up maybe a little bit too quickly. Even though I'm all for like a quick breeze, this was honestly maybe a little bit rushed in spots. I think Matt Shakman does a really good job directing here, coming off of starting doing It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia episodes to WandaVision, to directing episodes of Monarch for Apple TV, to then probably one of the biggest movies of the summer. It's quite a jump, but he does a great job. I think he handles the action very well. He does some great job, especially following stuff like the Silver Surfer, the Human Torch, and the Fantastic Car, and the way he uses movement I think is really sharp. Everything is in camera, it all looks like a great way to showcase the different powers being utilized. Everything is, for the most part, from an action standpoint, very well captured, as well as the more dramatic standpoint stuff that I think he does a great job handling. Michael Giacchino does the score. He's probably one of the best composers working today, and I think he quickly just, came up with a 60s aesthetic theme that perfectly fits that world and also just instantly became iconic for the Fantastic Four. It's a great score throughout the whole thing, and I just love that there's already a iconic theme to go along with this new batch of characters. The visual effects just look really sharp throughout the whole thing, which is just kind of nice to see because MCU in general from past few years has definitely been shaky on how the visual effects look, but I do think it's genuinely quite strong here. And on top of that, I think the thing that blew me away the most was how great the cinematography looked. It's probably one of the best MCU looking films ever, and I was not expecting that. The trailers don't really do it justice with how good of a looking film this actually is. This was shot on Panavision, and this whole film does look like it was shot on actual film. There's such excellent detail throughout the whole thing. Genuinely very breathtaking shots. I think there's a great use of scale, especially with stuff like Galactus. You kind of have to get that right. And in parts, there's just such excellent contrast and use of color that you don't really get to see a lot of days now with these big blockbusters. You kind of get that overexposure look that I'm definitely not a fan of, but I thought it genuinely was a very good looking film, and it blew me away in a lot of spots with how great it looked. And on top of that, I gotta respect how the MCU, it seemed like they were almost taking a shot at showcasing visuals such as Interstellar and how Christopher Nolan shot space in that movie and black holes. We have a space sequence that genuinely has some very good looking visuals, and even though it's not up to the caliber of a film like Interstellar, it looks very sharp, and I really admired how great they went with the visuals and just making this look very lived in, even though this is clearly a different universe than the Earth that we know in the main MCU. This feels like a 60s period Earth. It's got all the costume design, the production design that you want, and it also just feels seamless. And I think the way that they captured it with how great of a looking film this is, it makes it quite immersive. And I honestly just kind of wanted to spend more time in this version of this world with the Fantastic Four. So overall, despite the film being a little bit rushed in spots, I think this is genuinely a very good MCU film. It's a great representation of the Fantastic Four, greatly showcasing the family dynamic. I think all the casting works, all the characters work, their chemistry with one another is really strong. It's a really solid story with some really great visuals and cinematography throughout the whole thing. I think the 60s aesthetic is really unique and sharp. And overall, it was just a very well made Marvel film and really nice to see. And that's why I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10.